Welcome to Finally Fettled, the podcast where cannabis meets conversation and maybe a little chaos.
We're your hosts,
Jackie
and Tori, here to keep it real about our cannabis journeys, share some laughs, and potentially even drop a little knowledge along the way.
We're all about making cannabis fun, approachable, and a bit less intimidating, whether you're a seasoned smoker or just kinda curious.
So sit back, spark up, and let's explore the highs, the lows, and everything in between.
Responsibly, of course. Let's get this sesh started.
Do not use cannabis if you're under the age of 21. Keep cannabis out of the reach of children. Please consume responsibly. Hello, Fine Fettle fam. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Finally Fettled. Today, we are so excited to be here with our friend Rich from Queer and Cannabis. Hi, Rich.
Hey, how's it going, Dory?
Before we get started, Jackie, talk to us about what we've consumed responsibly today.
All right. This morning, we consumed, all of us responsibly. By the way, Scottie has returned this week, guys. Hello, welcome, Scottie, again.
Hi.
Hey, Scottie.
Again.
Hi. Welcome back.
This morning, we all consumed together Strawberry Cough from Budhaus. It is a sativa strain. The genetics are believed to be a cross between haze and strawberry fields. It's a sweet berry kind of flavor, aroma. And yeah, it's just a nice little uplifting thing we're doing here this morning because we are feeling great.
That wheeze. Everything. You know we're a table full of smokers when we start wheezing.
All right, so yes, Rick
Guys,
is here. What's up?
Can I just say real quick, Strawberry Cough is my favorite strain of all time. So
shout out to
happy
Strawberry Cough.
that this is what we consumed responsibly today.
So this is my first time with this strain, and I'm pretty obsessed with sativa. Like I'm a smoker.
You're a Sativa Diva too?
I'm a Sativa Diva. Like
Yes.
I want to feel like I'm about to have a heart attack.
No.
It's like that like moment where you're like, I'm gonna die, my heart is gonna stop. That's where I'm like, yeah.
Yes.
Like that's when we ride till dawn.
Wow.
Sativa Diva.
I could get on that level.
You get it.
So yeah, I feel it. My heart's kind of pumping. I'm good.
This is my favorite
Run
strain.
after this.
Okay, so yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I could then definitely do that because I do like to run when I'm a little high.
Yeah. Yeah, just a little.
Move over, Ozempic. We have what is it? The Strawberry Cough.
Yes. That's it. All right, let's get into it.
I have a question real quick. If you were going to go to Trader Joe's, what's your go-to item?
Ooh, Trader Joe's. My go-to item would be the curry.
Oh.
They have a really good yellow curry.
I have never had it.
Okay.
Yeah, and then just ground some turkey or whatnot, and then add some vegetables and put a little bit of that curry on it over some jasmine rice. It is legit. It is so good, especially being so cold. Nothing like curry to warm up your belly.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. I'm getting that next time.
Me too.
Yeah, same. I was just saying I wanted some curry the other day.
It's delicious.
Heck yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's get into it. Rich, talk to us. Tell us a little bit about Queer and Cannabis, what you hope to do, how you started, a little bit about yourself, your journey with cannabis. We want to hear it all.
Absolutely. So, Queer and Cannabis, you had said I'm the founder. Queer and Cannabis has been a passion project of mine for several years now. And it really was the result of understanding, the robust queer cannabis history that we have. Not a lot of folks understand or know that cannabis legalization within the U.S. Was a direct response to the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the late 80s and early 90s. And so, I grew up in California. I'm a California kid. And so, this history was always something that was top of mind. And, I think that I was always born a queer advocate. So, that part of history was really interesting to me. And, growing up on the West Coast in California, cannabis was very normal, especially within my family. Cannabis was that funny smelling cigarette that, my uncles would smoke after a barbecue, and they would always laugh. So, cannabis was always just something that just was there with adults and whatnot. And as I, got older and I started to become more of an advocate and really started to really champion, queer rights, LGBTQ rights, I realized that there is such a correlation between advocacy and cannabis. And so, cannabis was not my first career. My first career was, it was in the marketing department of a company called Hot Topic, that goth scary store.
Goodness.
Yeah, I was half the marketing department in the early 2000s. And that's where I really started to understand what marketing was and understanding, how like music influenced culture and how culture influenced music and specialty buying and all that jazz. So I was with them for quite some time, and then got out of that and then went into beauty of all things. And so I started to work for a company called MAC Cosmetics and started to help with education and training and whatnot. And I did beauty for about 10 years. During that time, I moved halfway across the country to Oklahoma, where I was working in the Oklahoma market and doing education and training for L'Oreal and Estee Lauder brands. And, as an educator, it was fun, and, beauty was definitely my passion. And right in around 2020, the world was introduced to COVID. And, as an educator, especially a beauty educator, my whole function was to go into, Ulta's and Sephora's and educate and train their sales staff on whatever brand I was working with. And, COVID started. You can't really touch anyone. And, people aren't going out. And, it was a career that I'd worked on for about 10 years. And, within a couple of weeks, we were all displaced. There was no need for educators during COVID. So I was displaced, and I was living in Oklahoma, and I was trying to figure out, what do I do? Beauty was not going to be a thing, and these types of jobs weren't going to be available for the foreseeable future. Mm-hmm. So me, like millions of Americans, we just had to pivot and try to figure out what to do. And during that time, I was living in Oklahoma, and being a brown queer guy in Oklahoma in the middle of a pandemic, looking for a job, it was pretty hard to find a job. And I found myself just trying to figure out what plan B was, right? Because no one had a pandemic on their, in the foreseeable future, right? So again, me, hundreds and thousands of Americans, I started to go to my local dispensary a little more often because my anxiety was high and the world was just kind of crumbling and everything, all the sense of normalcy was gone. And so I would go and talk to the bud tenders, and they were like my lifeline because we couldn't really talk to anyone. And you go to the dispensary and there's 5 people, and you're like, I want to talk to you. And we would just chit chat, talk about cannabis history. I would talk about Dennis Perone and all the queer trailblazers who helped legalize marijuana, and they were so excited about it, and they would teach me about different strains, and it just became a good friendship, right? That I didn't expect to have, Mm-hmm. And one day, one of the managers was like, "Hey, you should work in cannabis." And I'm like, "Well, I'm in beauty, but it's been challenging, and it's been hard to find a job, and people don't want to hire me." And she's like, "Well, you bring so much great energy, so just try to see if there's any openings, and there's some really great brands that are coming through." And I was like, okay. So I went home, probably smoked a joint, and then got on the computer and updated my resume and started to reach out to cannabis companies to see if they would hire me. And sure enough, I got several responses back and was like, okay, this might be a thing. And, having that background in California and remembering the legalization in 96, it just kind of was just okay, I got this. This is kind of familiar. And this company interviewed me, and they were like, I think you'd be perfect for what we need. And they really leaned into my experience as a marketer, and my experience as an educator. And they saw all these things that they wanted to have. And to help build their brand. And so they hired me, and it was pretty easy transition. I mean, at the end of the day, it was a consumer product, right? So I went from selling and educating on lipsticks to then selling edibles, and trying to figure out how, when people came in to a dispensary, once we sold our product into that location, educating the staff, I knew how to do that. That's what we did with big makeup brands. How to build events. I knew that. I knew how to build events. There were so many things that you just cross over from a different industry. And because my industry was so aesthetic and so people facing, that it just was okay, give me these 6 SKUs of this brand, and give me a team of bud tenders, and I will educate them, I will inspire them, I'll show them a good time so that when I left, they would want to support the brand that I worked with. And it turns out that being educated and passionate and treating people like humans was actually a good thing. And I made a ton of friends, and the companies that I'd worked for did really well. And I noticed that I was building brands for them, and it felt good. And it felt good to work again, and it felt good to be in a different industry that I knew was rooted in advocacy, was rooted in queer folks, So there was like this tie back that made sense to me. And so I worked for this company in Oklahoma, and then they were like, hey, like, you're great. Would love to expand and maybe have you move into a different market. And, Oklahoma was pretty chaotic at the time. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'm down. Let's go. Like, I'm done here. And so my family and I, we sold our home, packed up our belongings and our dogs, and we left from Oklahoma and, drove to Massachusetts and started a new life, in a state that felt safe, in an environment that felt safe, and in an industry that felt safe. And so it was great. And this was in the middle of COVID, so like it still was crazy times, but we did it, and we moved and just kind of hit the ground running and started building that brand. And we started making a lot of money, and we were like closing like dozens of doors a week. And I was educating and doing all the things and events and strategic partnerships and just leveraging the last like 20 years of my career into cannabis and into this new, this state. And it was great, and it was fun, and there was so much community, and it was great until it wasn't, And like all cannabis markets, they mature, and things become harder, and you end up realizing that there's more cannabis products than there are consumers. And there was a moment where it became chaotic, and it was a race to the bottom, as everyone I'm sure is totally familiar with. Mm-hmm. And once people start to not make money, and once companies start to lose money, then it becomes pretty chaotic, and people become mean. And you start to see the true colors of people. And so, I think, and this is such a long response to your question, but, I think it's important to know like the timeline of everything. And so,
I appreciate it. I appreciate the whole backstory.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. And so, I think at that point, I just was seeing so much discrimination. There were so many just bad things that were happening. And again, when people lose their money, they start to get mean and stuff like that. And so I started to see, a lot of similarities. I saw like my community, working in this industry and being involved, being involved in the grow, being involved, public facing, but I didn't see my community, breaking that glass ceiling. There was no LGBTQ folks, in upper management or leadership roles. And you could tell, right? You could tell like the community vibe, it was just starting to just bleed. Yeah. And so, we navigate, and I ended up getting a new job and working for a large MSO. And I think that experience was really important for me to have as well, and to see a different side of the cannabis industry, because I, for the most part, up until then, had worked for small companies, really just like cutting edge, just trendy brands, really great lifestyle cannabis brands. It was a crazy kind of moment, and at that moment, I'd realized that I was tired of building brands, and I really wanted to put like my passion into my passion project, Queer in Cannabis. And so I made the conscious decision to leave my job and to pursue Queer in Cannabis full time. I have a wealth of knowledge. I could always go back to like consulting and going back to freelance work, but I knew that I needed to do this, because every time that I would go in and talk about queer history within the cannabis space, you would see, the bud tenders and people on the other side just feeling excited and passionate and feeling like, wow, this industry that we're in, like, it was always advocated from the queer community, and so I was just like, this feeling that I get when I educate about this kind of like community that we're building is so important, right? And so that's, in April of 2024, that was the first day that I woke up and was like, all right, Queer and Cannabis is going to be everything, from the moment I wake up to when I go to bed. And, within it, it's been less than a year, but we've been growing so much. And, Queer and Cannabis is kind of like my love letter to the queer folks who are no longer with us, who are trailblazed through giving us the right and free this plant. And, that's always been like at the core of what we do is to educate. So like, I go into different dispensaries and we educate, and I give them the robust history of, Prop 215, which was the first time that the plant was medicinally legal within the state of California. And, just kind of talking about that and just going a little bit deeper into knowing that that there was this gay man named Dennis Perrone, who was a fierce advocate, helped write legislation to free the plant in the city of San Francisco. And that was the first time that a city was legalizing medicinal marijuana. And then he went, after that was passed, then he went and helped write legislation for Prop 215 with the Compassionate Care Act, which essentially gave people who were sick the opportunity to use cannabis, as medicine. And so it was, it's been a long journey, but it's been fun. And, being able to educate not only these bud tenders, but also work with different brands and educate their sales team on this history. Right.
It's important.
It's super, super important. And, unfortunately, we're in a day and age where history can be rewritten or it can be denied. And, when you look at what HIV/AIDS did to my community, it wiped out generations. The people who were a part of this time that were marching, the majority of them are not here anymore. And these stories need to be told. We as a world, as society, we need to pay tribute to the people who spent their lives to help advocating for less fortunate or marginalized folks.
Yeah.
So, with Queer and Cannabis, we educate. We also are fierce advocates. We have a special advocacy focus on the trans community, as well as the Black and Brown community. So, we advocate, we raise money, we throw events that go back to help these organizations. One of the organizations that we work with a lot is called the Massachusetts Trans Political Coalition. And, over the last couple of years with the demonization of the trans community, they've received, just a lot of hate, and a lot of their sponsors have decided to go away, to not create friction or, chaos and the politicization of the trans community. So, it's organizations like Queer and Cannabis that see that something's going on, that this community is starting to be alienated, and resources are becoming few and far between. So, that's we raised money. We threw a really cool big queer dance party last June, and the majority of our ticket sales, I think it was 90% of our ticket sales, went back to the organization. So, we do what we can, and we make sure that we lift people up as much as we can, and anything we can do to build community.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Yeah, that is an incredible story. You're doing an amazing work. I can't believe the whole backstory, and you kind of left this, somewhat secure corporate job to kind of just go start your own path and do this kind of amazing work that you're doing.
Yeah, it's been pretty amazing and scary.
Yeah, I bet. So, how do you think that dispensaries and other brands in the cannabis industry can support you and kind of get more involved and work with you? Okay.
Yeah. I think that the best way to support, Queer and Cannabis is honestly, like I always said, the best way you can do to support is reshare. We have queer.in.cannabis on Instagram, and that's the majority of all of everything that we do is always announced there. So, I think, just following, just resharing, but also giving that space as well, like Ready Dispensary and Native Sun Dispensary, they had me both dispensaries had me come in and educate, their staff, doing things like that, partnering with the community and being able to focus on the education, focus on the history of it. Because I do think that again, history, the only way that we're going to be able to not redo what we've done in the past is by embracing history and understanding it. And, I think that being able to partner up in such a great way, I think makes the most sense for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, are you mostly based in Massachusetts, or are you expanding to other states?
So, Massachusetts is my home state. So, a lot of our programming is done here. But, we are working with several organizations outside of in New York and New Jersey. We did a really cool series of events with the travel agency out of New York. We're in conversations with New Jersey right now doing, some drag shows or some rolling classes. So that's really, really exciting as well. Our rolling classes have been taken off.
Rolling with the homies,
Rolling
right?
with the homies,
Yes.
yes. So rolling with the homies, that's, one of our initiatives. Like I had, mentioned, building community is important for us. And so we thought, okay, let's work on a technique that is kind of no one's really doing anymore. And it's such a important part of cannabis culture, right?
Yeah.
And so, we were like, let's do some rolling classes. And so I partnered up with my really good friend, Kayla. She's an amazing baker, but she also is a fierce roller. And we were like, let's do something. And so I built a curriculum, right? Because my background's in education. So I built this whole curriculum, this class curriculum, workshop curriculum that not only taught our students how to roll like a baddie, but we also talked about cannabis history, right? I was able to talk about legalization and talk about how the LGBTQ community has always been at the forefront, but I also was able to talk about Massachusetts cannabis history, give a timeline, and really highlight and lift up some LGBTQ brands as well. So it was really cool to be able to throw that in there. And then there's also a portion of how to read a cannabis jar,
Ooh,
a flower jar.
Okay,
right?
Yeah.
That
is so important.
It's so important, right? Because
Yeah.
think about it. How many people come in to find Fettled and they're just completely clueless?
Oh yeah.
That's the majority of people, right?
Yep,
And it's so someone needs to educate. Or how many times have you had someone say, "Hey, I have back pain. What do I need?
Yep.
What do I get?
What am I looking for?"
Exactly. So, having been in so many dispensaries and doing thousands of pop-ups in my career, you start to remember the most common questions.
Yes.
And so I took all those like common questions, right, and I just answered them in this, and so there's a section in Rolling with the Homies where they can look at that jar and figure out like what the terpenes are, where the terpenes are, and what the percentage is, and be able to figure out like what this flower is going to do. Right. And so there's a portion of that, and that's been really, really cool. And in fact, the dispensary, one of the dispensaries rooted in that we'd host these joint rolling classes, and they were saying that like their customers come in and they're more educated. So that was really, really exciting to hear.
Yeah.
Because like, again, knowledge is power.
Yeah, that's the whole point. So that's amazing.
It was fun. Yeah. And then right after that, then we go into hands-on joint rolling, and it's pretty spectacular. And those are great. And we also do art classes, right? Because art is therapy, and art is like building community. So I partnered up with a fantastic organization called Lavender Education, and we teach collage classes. And it's a really special moment for both these classes to be able to, at some point, kind of pull yourself back and take a look and seeing, strangers become friends. As cheesy as that sounds. And, you see like building community. And educating community. And, it's cool because, we sometimes forget that cannabis, like the cannabis industry, is stigmatized, right? And then you have like the queer community that's stigmatized. So it's great to be able to like see these two like stigmatized groups come together in a safe space and like leave with like 2 new friends or 3 new friends.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I love it.
Yeah.
You're doing amazing work. All right, so Rich, you touched on this a little bit, but I just want to hear a little bit more. Historically, cannabis has played a big role in the HIV/AIDS crisis. So how do you see that legacy kind of continuing on today?
Tori, that's a great question. And to be quite honest, my response to this question would have been completely different a few weeks ago. So, unfortunately, right now in the U.S., we're seeing so much rollback, the erasure of the LGBTQ community, essentially. We're starting to see on, government state websites, the omission of the queer community, the omission of HIV/AIDS resources. The government is really legitimately trying to remove the T, the trans, and the Q, queer, out of LGBTQ. We're starting to see our government try to no longer acknowledge gay pride. Additionally, Women's History Month. Additionally, Black History Month, and Indigenous People Month. So it's definitely a weird time. We're also seeing a freeze in government funding, which plays a direct effect with the resources for HIV/AIDS. Resources that help with testing, resources that help with educating, resources that are going to keep communities safe and healthy. It's a big deal, especially when we think about, in 1996, when the Compassionate Care Act was passed. You know what I mean? Like legitimately, not giving sick people the opportunity to heal, to take care of themselves. That was in 1996. We're in 2025, and we're seeing the same type of rollback, the same type of injustice for marginalized folks. They're really just trying to legislate the LGBTQ community out of existence. And, we're not going anywhere. We've been here forever. And, we don't need the government to tell us that we're human and that we're people. So, it's a crazy time. And I think that's why advocacy is so important. And I think that understanding your history is so important, because history will tell us what our future is. If we look back and if we do our research, we're in scary times, so whoever's listening, if you have, a homie that's part of the LGBT community, reach out to them. The existence is trying to be erased. We're in a really scary place. I think we're born just a little bit tougher, because we've had to deal with adversity and bullying since we were born, but I think right now is just, it's a hard time. So if you do have family and friends part of the community, reach out, tell them you love them, and if there's a part of the community that you don't fully understand, try to learn, try to learn about differences. It's not a scary thing. And, just love. And it sounds so cheesy, but love is the answer. Compassion is the answer.
100%. Yes.
And just remember, we have more in similarities than we have differences. Mm-hmm. And now is the time for us to build bridges. Yep.
Yep.
Build bridges with other communities. I'll never forget. And then this was the last thing. And then we're wrapping up. Queer and Cannabis had the opportunity to speak at the Boston Freedom Alley, which is a legendary cannabis event that happens every year. And, it was the first time that queer folks were able to speak as a community about the contributions that we had made. And so it was phenomenal. It was such a highlight of Queer and Cannabis' existence. But so we spoke, and talked about the history, and we talked about the challenges that we face. And it was a full house. And after the panel was over, a gentleman came up to me, an African-American gentleman, and he just looked me dead in the eye and said, I didn't understand this history. I didn't understand those challenges. And he says, if they don't like you, they don't like me. And I said, absolutely. I said, we might not understand how it is. I don't understand how it is to be Black. You don't understand how it is to be a part of the LGBT community. I said, well, we both know how it feels like when you walk into a store and someone looks at you different. We both know what it looks like when you talk to someone and they pick up on maybe an inflection or pick up on some sass. You know what I mean? We both have been judged. And so it was one of those moments where it's yes, we need to build bridges. We need to build community. We need to make sure that check in on our brothers and sisters and folks, So, but anyways, yeah, I just wanted to share that story because I thought it was definitely a powerful one.
Absolutely, for sure. And like you said, we have a lot more in common with each other than we do differences.
1,000%.
Mm-hmm. All right, Rich, what other advice, if any, do you have for other queer folks in the industry who are kind of trying to get more involved and kind of, help the community become more seen?
I feel like, anyone who's new and wants to come into the industry, I would say do whatever makes you happy, right? But also keep in mind that cannabis is, still in its infancy. So, processes aren't really fully vetted. There's definitely some challenges. So I think that if it's something that they're passionate in, absolutely 100%, but just know that it can get a little batshit crazy. But for the most part, it's fantastic. And as far as advocating, I think that inviting their friends to some of the events that we're doing, would be phenomenal. Sharing, their experiences, about being queer in the cannabis space, sharing the stories of, our trailblazers, like Mary Rathbun. So Mary Rathbun, she's a part of my education, a fierce ally. And she was, living in the Castro district in San Francisco, during the height of the AIDS epidemic. And, what she would do is that she would score all this weed, right? She had a ton of friends who were unfortunately, passing away from HIV/AIDS. And it's rumored that she'd spend her $400 social security check and buy brownie mix and score as much weed.
Yes, I was going to say, is this Brownie Mary?
Yeah, Brownie Mary.
Yes.
Yeah. And so and she would make, just dozens and dozens of brownies and just send them off to different AIDS wards and just help with, the quality of life, right? Because, during this time, not only was HIV/AIDS, deteriorating your body, but think about the psychological, component of it. The majority of these folks who were passing, whether they didn't have family, they didn't have a lot of strong support. So, marijuana was helping with quality of life. It was helping with wasting syndrome. It was helping with, appetite. And so, that advocacy, I think, is phenomenal, and super important. So, I always say you can be an ally, march in a parade, come to a joint rolling class, come to one of our events, make brownies for your homies. You know what I mean? Just anything to just build the community and to most importantly, build bridges, right?
Yeah.
Where I feel right now it's such a divisive time. And, I always believe that we have way more in common than we will ever have not in common.
Absolutely. That is amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and kind of sharing your story. This has been so enlightening and so amazing to hear. So I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And tell our listeners, for everyone listening, where can they find you? Do all the plugs.
All the plugs, yeah. So if you want to keep in touch with us, you can find us on Instagram at queer.in.cannabis. Also, if you want to buy some merch, we also have our merch store. That's at queerincannabis.com. Right now, we have some really dope t-shirts.
I'm rocking one today.
Yeah.
I love it.
We have some tote bags and everything. Everything is all created in-house. And, it really is just kind of embodies what Queer in Cannabis is. So definitely give us a follow. And, thank you so much for this amazing opportunity. I feel like visibility is so important right now. And we really appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, we loved having you on.
All right, guys. And don't forget, you can now write to us at podcast@findfettled.com.
Yes, we want to hear your stories, questions, anything you have to say to us. Let us know in the email. You can also find us on Instagram unless it gets deleted again.
Right.
At Finally Fettled. Or on X, FindFettle420. And guys, as always,
please consume responsibly.
Yay.
Thank you. Thanks.
Do not use cannabis if you are under the age of 21. Keep cannabis out of the reach of children. Please consume responsibly.